John. Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
Question is that the bill, shortly entitled the Nevis Contractors Registration Regulations Bill 2021, be withdrawn. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. Bill withdrawn.
Mr. President, I rise once again and to seek leave to have the Nevis Contractors Registration and Regulation Bill 2021 be read a second time and commence the debate on the said bill. Mr. President, you would agree with me that the construction industry is one of the most important industries for supporting employment and economic growth on the island of Nevis. An examination of the gross domestic product of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis shows that the construction sector has consistently contributed over 16% of the GDP at constant and at current prices, according to statistics from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank from 2015 to present. The average contribution, Mr. President, to GDP at constant prices amounted to 17.35% and 20.01% at current prices, more than the hotel and restaurant sector, the agriculture sector, livestock and forestry sectors, the real estate sector, renting and business activities sector, the transportation, storage and communications sector, Mr. President. In addition, when I look at the Labor Department report for 2020, I observed that applicants for work permits for the construction sector represented some 14% of the total applications, second only to the service sectors, the services sector, which represented 32% of the total applications. According to that same report, Mr. President, employment in the construction sector at the end of the fourth quarter of 2020 amounted to 402 individuals out of a total of 4,661 persons, or approximately 8.6%. Bear in mind, Mr. President, that we are in a pandemic year. Therefore, we must appreciate that to support the growth of this industry, an appropriate legal framework is critical. This is why we are here today to debate and pass this important ordinance titled the Nevis Building Contractors Registration and Regulation Ordinance 2021. Mr. President, we are all aware that there is a high demand for houses on the island of Nevis. And the Minister of Housing would have indicated just this morning the oversubscription of 2 developments that is presently ongoing, which I believe has contributed significantly to the buoyancy in the construction sector. Many of our homes, persons and entities have suffered in the past, Mr. President, of questionable construction quality, which have resulted in high construction costs and at times frustration to the homeowner or the entities. We are concerned, Mr. President, of the construction quality. And we believe that in an effort to ensure that the construction quality is on par anywhere in the world, And while at times the construction quality is not necessarily always as a result of the contractor, there are times when there are design issues, and there are times when there are skill set variance of the workers, carelessness, negligence, and in some circumstances, Mr. President, there can be at times abuse in the construction sector, to name a few. This piece of legislation seeks to contribute to the reduction in these fallouts and will bring this important industry and its activities in sharp focus. Of course, Mr. President, I would admit that it will not eliminate all of the issues on its own, because it requires an all-stakeholders approach to reduce and eventually eliminate some of these negative issues in the industry and improve the construction quality and professionalism going forward. Mr. President, at our first ever Contractors Award ceremony, executed by my ministry in November of 2029 at NIPA, I stated then, and I quote.
Sorry. Could you rephrase that? 2029?
2019.
You said 29, that's why.
In November of 2019. Thanks for the correction, Mr. President. I stated at that time, and I quote, "I wish that the industry moves on a path towards more training and development with certification. This would include on-the-job coaching, working with other training agencies. I wish to assign the responsibility to a government unit or office for promoting the development of the construction industry, working with any non-government agencies such as the contractors or the Contractors Association. Finally, it is my wish to introduce and adopt appropriate and new construction technology and materials that have been tried, tested, and proven in the construction industry." End of quote. This piece of legislation is an important step in achieving that commitment which was made to the contractors during my remarks then. Mr. President, I want to salute the contractors by reminding them that they have made it possible to improve the standard of living of all Nevisians by providing roof over our heads and making it possible for all homes to have access to various amenities we often take for granted, such as water, electricity, and toilet facilities. In so doing, Mr. President, they have provided a level of comfort and pride in our people that they own something that they would last for many years, a place called home. However, Mr. President, without a proper legal framework and the appropriate regulations, this would not be possible and sustainable. Mr. President, to get to the point of having this bill in this honorable House, we would have consulted with various contractors at a town hall meeting facilitated by the Ministry of Communication and Works and the Department of Physical Planning in collaboration with the Legal Department on Tuesday, the 7th of September, 2021 at the St. Paul's Anglican Church Hall in Charlestown. In addition, we would have received a number of written comments and inputs which helped to shape this ordinance. We express sincere thanks and appreciation for all those who would have in some way contributed to the drafting of this ordinance. To the hard-working legal advisor and her team at the legal department, including Ms. Rhonda Nisbet-Brown, and especially young Dijano Liebert. I want to congratulate him in particular, Mr. President, for his yeoman service on this legislation. To the Director and staff of the Department of Physical Planning, and Mr. President, to my own staff at the Ministry of Communication and Works, in particular, the Permanent Secretary, Dr. Ernest Stapleton, and Mr. Denzel Stanley, the Assistant Secretary, the Assistant Principal Secretary there at the Ministry. I want to emphasize the point and make it crystal clear that this piece of legislation is no way seeking to interfere with the role and function of the Department of the Physical Planning and Environment or the Electricity Commissioner under the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance of 2005 and the Electricity Ordinance of 1998, respectively. The emphasis of this ordinance is on registration, licensing, and regulating the conduct and professionalization of the contractors in the construction industry. Let me say it again, Mr. President. The emphasis of this ordinance is on registration, licensing, and regulating the conduct and professionalization of the contractors in the construction industry. The Construction Commissioner would work with the various agencies to improve the standards via training and expose the various contractors in their various categories. Mr. President, this ordinance seeks to establish an administration and application process for contractors through the formation of a new post entitled Construction Commissioner. Mr. President, the legislation makes provision for the payment of fees on applying for a license. But we have decided, in light of this global pandemic, that we would delay the fees until 2022 or even in 2023. However, Mr. President, all other aspects of the ordinance would seek to come in to bear before that time. In other words, we would allow the process to go ahead, Mr. President, without the imposition of the fees. Mr. President, very quickly, I want to highlight the various sections of this ordinance. Part 1, preliminaries. Part 2, which deals with the applicability and administration of the ordinance. Part 3, complaints, procedures, and appeals. Part 4, Mr. President, deals with miscellaneous items. And then we have a number of schedules, Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Mr. President, I want to say to our contractors, because I've received a number of telephone calls in the last week or so, that there seems to be some level of fear of this legislation. I want to say to the general public that there need not to be any fear when it comes to this legislation. The idea is, Mr. President, is to ensure that if someone wakes up in the morning and decides that he wants to be a contractor, that there really should be a systematic approach for that individual to become a contractor. the construction commissioner would be applied to based on the various application forms, and he or she applying for a contractor's license, Mr. President, would be approved once they meet the necessary criteria. Same thing for electricians, same thing for plumbers, HVAC, low voltage individuals, Mr. President. So I want the general public and those who are in this sector not to be fearful, Mr. President, of what we are seeking to do. Because all that we are seeking to do, Mr. President, is to ensure that there is some procedures when it comes to how an individual can become a licensed contractor, how an individual can become a licensed electrician, or plumber, or HVAC. The procedure as it stands now, Mr. President, is to go to the Ministry of Finance, get your business or your license, and say that you are an electrician or contractor. And we are saying, while that is all well and good, we want to ensure, Mr. President, that going forward, anyone who is desirous of becoming a practitioner in this sector, that there is some measures in which they must follow. Mr. President, the question was also raised about our friends overseas. And we often have individuals who would come to Nevis and do specialized tasks in the construction sector. We are also saying to them, Mr. President, that there is that avenue as well for them to be licensed on the island of Nevis once they are coming to do a specific task on the island of Nevis. There are some fees, Mr. President, which I believe are some small fees. And as I said before, that the fees would be deferred for a later date. But while we consider the fees, Mr. President, I also want to consider the various classes of contractors. We are proposing that there would be commercial and residential, industrial building contractors. And then we are also proposing residential building contractors. We are proposing special building contractors, and this is specifically for those who may come to Nevis from overseas: electrician, HVAC, low voltage, carpenter, plumbers, and we are also, Mr. President, considering the registered entities as well, because there are some companies on the island of Nevis that are construction companies. And while we would want to speak to the individuals, we also want to speak to the companies as well. Mr. President, I also want to say to the general public that we have also ensured that there is some complaints procedures and appeal. And I want to spend a little time on this section, Mr. President, because I believe that there are times when in the construction sector, the only recourse that some persons have is to go to the High Court. And we are saying that we are hoping that before a matter gets to the High Court, that there can be some procedures. We have established in this ordinance a complaints committee. And the complaints committee will consist of 5 members. Senior attorney would be the chairman, a practicing architect or engineer. This is part 3, section 21. A senior registered contractor or a member of the Contractors Association of St. Kitts and Nevis, an accountant, and a chief building inspector. This committee, Mr. President, is extremely important because oftentimes we have had some challenges between contractors, service providers, and proprietors that have ended in the courts. And we are hoping that before any matter reaches the court, that it can be settled by the complaints committee. Mr. President, we also have the registration procedure, Mr. President. And one of the requirements of the registration procedure is for anyone who wishes to be registered that they must be practicing in the field for 5 years at minimum. But added to that, Mr. President, 2 of those 5 years must be in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. We feel, Mr. President, that while there are those who practice construction in various lands, the standard and procedures of what they do in different parts may not be what we do here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And we want to make sure that if an approval is granted for any individual to practice here in St. Kitts and Nevis, or in particular on the island of Nevis, that they meet the requirement of so to be registered, Mr. President. And Mr. President, we feel that this would add some greater quality to the construction sector here on the island of Nevis. We feel, Mr. President, that this legislation will ensure that the end user would be receiving better quality, greater professionalism in the industry, and more accountability. Mr. President, I believe that this piece of legislation would put the island of Nevis in good stead. And I believe, Mr. President, that the work that have gone into this legislation, the drafting of it, the consultation, the reworking of it, is as a testimony, Mr. President, of the importance of this sector to the island and to the people of Nevis. And the input, Mr. President, by those in the private sector, by the legal department, by the planning department, and also, Mr. President, we feel that this piece of legislation encapsulates all of that contribution, Mr. President. I want to say once again, Mr. President, to all those who would have contributed to this ordinance, how thankful I am as the minister. And I believe at the end of the day, Mr. President, that the people of Nevis will be better off for the passage of this legislation. Mr. President, with those words, may it please.
Mr. President, members opposite, clerk of the House, legal advisor, officers on duty, members in the public gallery, all media houses, general public, I bid you a pleasant good afternoon. Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution to the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Contractors Registration and Regulation Bill. Mr. President, I wish to make some suggestions or recommendations for this Honorable House to consider as it relates to the proposed bill. I make reference to Section 8, that is the registration section, and more specifically, subsection 4. And I propose, Mr. President, that the 14 days time limit to submit additional documents be extended to 30 days to accommodate those applicants who may require additional documentation or information from overseas. Mr. President, as we are still in the COVID-19 pandemic, sometimes it is very difficult for persons to obtain original documents if needs be, by way of post, and as we have seen in some cases through courier services. So I think a 30-day time limit may be most reasonable in those circumstances. Mr. President, I similarly propose an amendment to Section 5B to include the reasons for the refusal of a license. And that is because, Mr. President, if you look at Section 5C, there is an appeal procedure that is outlined in Section 24. So for ease of business, ease of reference, it is perhaps prudent for the Commissioner to include the reason for the refusal of the application for license in Section B. Those are all the housekeeping matters, Mr. President. Yes, Section B, so where it states B, notify the applicant in writing within 30 days of receipt of the application of the refusal. And reasons, I'm proposing that reasons for the refusal be added in that section, if it pleases this Honorable House. Sorry. So we are looking at Section 8, registration, subsection 5. Yes, 8.5. I said 8.4 before, so 8.4, the time limit I was proposing that it be increased from 14 days to 30 days. And then in the following subsection, subsection 5B, where it speaks about the refusal, I am simply saying that the reasons for the refusal to be added. I hope those recommendations are met with favor, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, on the substance of the legislation before us, Mr. President, one of the issues for consideration is whether, having heard the minister, there is indeed a need for a commissioner, for a contractor commissioner with a separate entity, either outside or within the Department of Physical Planning. Perhaps the aforementioned department would have been better served and strengthened by adding a licensing division without the need for an independent commissioner, which will no doubt create a new head or department head. And that is just something for this Honorable House to consider, Mr. President. I do understand the objective of the bill, which I hope is to serve and have all persons practicing in the construction industry to be registered either as an individual or company, which would in effect properly regulate the industry. Mr. President, I do concur with members opposite that there is a need for regulation in the construction industry. However, Mr. President, it is left to be seen whether this piece of legislation would lead to more bureaucratic red tape from the Department of Physical Planning or any other department which does not foster nor promote the ease of doing business. Whether persons working in the industry are required to have a professional license or a business license simultaneously was not made clear in the substantive legislation. I do not know if that was the intention of the draftsperson, but I do assume that a contractor, as outlined in Schedule 3, would be required to, in addition to having a business license trading as, would now be required to have a professional license. Perhaps the mover of the bill could clarify that that is the intention of the mover of the bill, that professional contractors are required to have both the business license at the same time as well as the professional license. So 2 licenses will be required. Just wanted to make sure that is the intention of Parliament, Mr. President. Pursuant to Section 14, the question is asked of the mover of the bill or the minister to clarify whether a licensed contractor under this ordinance is duly licensed to work in St. or whether there would be any waiver, or whether it does not apply to St. Kitts, as this is a Nevis ordinance. And I ask this question for the benefit of the public because persons have asked that question, Mr. President. So I leave that to the mover to make that clarification. I now move to Section 21, and the mover of the bill is asked to consider or perhaps give an explanation as to why the Director of Physical Planning was not considered or listed as a member of the Complaints Committee. Whilst we understand the objective of the bill, we must be mindful that we are in a global pandemic which has caused significant threats to economies in small island Eastern Caribbean states. One therefore must take into consideration the timing of this piece of legislation, which would no doubt place significant hardship on contractors and consumers alike. Mr. President, I am very grateful and delighted to hear the mover of the bill state a few minutes ago that the fees as outlined in Schedule 3 will be deferred for a period, I believe he said initially, until 2022. I stand to be corrected if I heard him incorrectly, but I am grateful that members opposite saw the need, taking into consideration the fact that we are in a pandemic and the economic hardship that these fees may impose not only for the contractors themselves, but also for consumers, that they took that into consideration and deferred the fees. Mr. President, as I look at the substantive legislation, I am indeed very grateful that members opposite have taken the time out to invest time and put in the necessary legal framework in place to regulate the trade and practices of contractors in the construction industry. Even though I stand on the opposition benches, Mr. President, we all perhaps would benefit significantly from having licensed contractors and persons who are not only qualified, but who have the experience to contribute significantly to the construction industry in terms of building not only residential homes, but commercial buildings within Nevis. I dare say, Mr. President, that one may ask the question, and perhaps the mover of the bill can clarify as to whether there would be any direct interaction or interface between the Director of Physical Planning and the contractor, the contract commissioner. And the reason why this question is posed to this Honorable House, Mr. President, is to simply seek clarification as to whether there would be any conflict or any red taping between this proposed regime and the existing Department of Physical Planning. One would hope, Mr. President, that all stakeholders, including the Department of Physical Planning, the contract commissioner, the legal department, and every other person involved would seek to ensure that there is ease of business, and the objective or spirit of this legislation would lend to facilitating a more productive construction industry. Mr. President, before I leave, I wish to say that I wish this particular bill a safe passage, and also, Mr. President, with your permission, I wish to take this opportunity to say a hearty, happy Teachers' Day to all teachers in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. While I am at the podium, Mr. President, I also use this opportunity to say congratulations as we continue to celebrate our elders and senior citizens during the month of October. Mr. President, that is the extent of my contribution.
Mr. President, I rise to make my contribution to this bill currently before this Honorable House, shortly entitled the Nevis Construction Registration and Regulation Bill 2021, which is essentially a bill to provide for the establishment of a construction commissioner, the registration and regulation of contractors, and for related or incidental matters. Mr. President, I join in support of my colleague and presenter of the bill, and to add my own, as they say in local parlance, my own 2 cents to this bill. And I want to start by saying that I am one who works closely with some contractors, numerous contractors, I must say. And I want to commend them all for their diligence, their attention to details, and the effort that they have exerted over the years to ensure that the construction industry continue to, one, to flourish, and two, also to be consistent with what we require by law here in the island of Nevis. I want to cast my mind back to as far as 1989, when we were visited by Hurricane Hugo Mr. President, you might be old enough, but I was old enough then to recall that Sunday morning when Hurricane Hugo, a hurricane or hurricanes that we didn't know anything about then, would have visited Nevis that fateful Sunday morning. It was not a large storm by any stretch of the imagination as compared to what we are seeing today. It was intense, about 90 miles per hour, but in the short 2 to 3 hours that it spent with us, it created havoc and destroyed a number of buildings here on the island of Nevis, our home included. Back in those days, you'd have had this thing you call panel board or something like that. The ceiling was this thing you could have torn easily. So a lot of roofs were damaged then. Structural integrity of buildings were undermined. And of course, that would have left us in a situation where we had to spend monies to rebuild. Over the years, we have seen the progression of the quality of construction here on the island of Nevis. I go to 1995 when we had Hurricane George, and shortly after George was Hurricane Marilyn, I recall. Those two hurricanes as well created havoc here on the island of Nevis. Then 1999 you had Lenny, and of course back in 2008 we would have had Omar, which was not as devastating. But I start that way, Mr. President, because I want to point out to the general public that over the years, over the last 20 years thereabout or more, we would have seen some significant improvement in the structural integrity of our buildings and structures here on the island of Nevis. And it must be attributed to our contractors, the regulation or the laws and ordinances that have been passed over the years, the physical planning laws that have been strengthened over the years by all subsequent administrations. And to that, we have to say we have done a good job in ensuring that construction here on Nevis can be looked at as a model for anyone throughout the Caribbean, or even internationally. But the question is whether we have arrived, Mr. President. I don't think we have. There's still much more to be done. As a matter of fact, these days we are being visited by hurricane or Category 5 hurricanes, really intense hurricanes. And they can actually get from a Category 1 to a Category 5 in the space of an hour or more. And as such, we have to continue day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year to shore up our regulations, to ensure that we are meeting the requirements to face these challenges. With global warming and climate change and that type of thing, you have seen a lot of changes in our climatic conditions that have led to natural disasters unseen or that we haven't seen in the past. And so we have to continue on this track. Therefore, Mr. President, this legislation has been brought today. And it is not a legislation to compete with our physical planning ordinance. It is not a legislation to pretty much pit the commissioner against the director of physical planning either, because of course the ordinance, once you go through it and examine it, you don't see any such thing in this ordinance. So the ordinance is speaking to the appointment of a contractors or construction commissioner. I hope I have it right, construction commissioner. And therefore, Mr. President, I want to look at some of the parts of this legislation that are applicable to this debate today, and to read some of it into the records as well. Mr. President, I want to start first of all, or at this point in time, to speak. Who is a contractor though? Can I get up tomorrow morning and say I'm a contractor? Maybe I can. But do I meet the requirements of a contractor? No. Here's what a contractor is. I'm told a contractor is a person or company that undertakes a contract to provide material or labor to perform a service or job. I can get up tomorrow morning and say I'm a contractor and get a contract and do that. But this legislation that we're looking at today is seeking to fix such and to ensure that moving forward, not any Joe Blow can pick up a hammer and a trowel and go down the road and say, I am a contractor. There are difficulties that may ensue as a result, Mr. President. And that is why this legislation is being brought. As a matter of fact, contractors can be seen as general contractors. We have many of them out there. I won't call names. Oh, I can. But if I start to call names, some may say, well, I am better than the other. So I don't want to get into that difficulty this afternoon. Huh? They've called all day, because I think that is one area that I believe that we have done a marvelous job in terms of the skills that our people possess in that particular sector, or this particular sector. Of course, you have subcontractors, Mr. President, electrician, plumbers, painters, tilers. So you have quite a number of aspects under the construction industry, and also skills that are available to us. But Mr. President, let me be clear and say that the purpose of this ordinance is to safeguard the general public, you know. It is to safeguard the general public and also to bring out the best in our contractors and subcontractors. It is not meant to retard them or to prevent them from progressing at all. It is very clear. And if the member opposite and anyone in the audience or on the outside on the street were to pick up this legislation and read it, you understand that it is meant to improve the quality of construction through its contractors and subcontractors. And that is what a good government do. A good government sit down and figure, how can we make things better? Right now as it is, Mr. President, we're in a pandemic. You've heard that we're in a pandemic all the time. It's been said all the time, and it was mentioned by the member opposite. But even though we are in a pandemic, I am telling you that construction is still robust here on the island of Nevis.
Very.
We're put on very as well. It is a robust industry here on the island of Nevis. And we cannot wait till next year or the year after or 5 years down the road to address some of the issues that we know can arise later on down the road. So since we are in this particular upward thrust in the construction industry, and it's supposed to continue as far as I'm concerned, the evidence is there to show that it will continue. So what do? Sit back? No. You have to act now so as to preserve yourself down the road. And that is why the ordinance is being brought now. We want to avoid the chaos that can ensue if all sorts of Joe Blow, as I said before, start to get into the industry because there's some money there to be made. Not only that, Mr. President, if you fix it now, it raises our level of doing business too, you know. Because when people come and start to investigate, who are the contractors out there? In this legislation, it provides for how you and I or anybody coming into this island can see who are registered contractors, who have that reputation and who they can rely on to provide quality construction for them. But I'll go into the legislation, Mr. President. Because, you know, as a property owner here on the island of Nevis, you have work to do. And you're spending your hard-earned money. You want to make sure it is done properly, professionally, and at the end of the day, when you write that final check, you must be pleased with the quality of work that you get. And that is why it is important that these contractors are registered and meeting the minimum requirement or minimum standards. Or I say minimum, but it can also mean that high standard that we have already set for ourselves. Mr. President, let me turn to the legislation quickly. First of all, Mr. President, in Part 1, Section 5, I'm going to help the presenter a little bit by looking at some of the functions of the Construction Commissioner. The Construction Commissioner, from what I see here, have many different functions. But of course, let me go to some to read them into the records, Mr. President. The functions of the Construction Commissioner are two. A, implement and supervise the provision of this ordinance. So, the Construction Commissioner must be competent with the knowledge of this ordinance. Simply put. B, establish and maintain a register of building contractors in accordance with the provisions of the ordinance. C, establish certification standards for determining the eligibility of persons desirous of providing the services set out in Schedule 3 below. D, establish qualification requirements for persons desirous of becoming registered contractors pursuant to the provisions of this ordinance. E, administer the application process for the registration and licensing of persons desirous of providing the services set out in the schedule. F, establish a licensing regime in accordance with the provision of Schedule 3 below. G, propose license fees for the various classes of license established by the Schedule 3. H, regulate the activities described in Schedule 3 and the persons engaged in such activities in the island of Nevis. Mr. President, it goes down to as far as M, but I'm not going to read all of them, but at least it gives you what is required of the construction commissioner. And they're very clear. Nowhere in here I see anything to say, well, interact, interface, or interfere with the director of planning. So this position is independent of the director of physical planning, which is good, because all that we are concerned about is the registration and oversight of our contractors and subcontractors, that is. Mr. President, over the years, I'll move along. Over the years, you know, there have been subcontractors and general contractors who have come from overseas and have worked here in the past. I am not too certain as to how those were handled in the past, but I can tell you, under this ordinance, we now know what is required of them when they come to the island of Nevis. And as a matter of fact, for all of the contractors out there, you now have some power, so to speak. You will have some knowledge as to who is here and who is, well, not necessarily who is coming here, but who is here. And as a matter of fact, the commissioner will certainly know all who should be coming here and who should be entitled to work here. Why I said that our contractors here on the island would have some power in knowing is because they'll have a chance to inspect the register from time to time, you know. Just like you can go down to the registry and pay $5 and inspect a register of lands. You can inspect this register. So if the mover of the bill decide to migrate tomorrow and go to St. Thomas and come back home, he hasn't been registered here, but decide to come back home to work. He may not need a work permit, but he'll need to register with the commissioner. That is correct. So at least we'll know he's duly registered and then can perform the duties that he has come here to perform. So in truth and in fact, this is now transparency at work. So you hear someone is down at, I won't call no particular establishment, but down at Pinny somewhere working. You hear someone from wherever, Barbados, down there working. You can then do your own investigation or bring it to the attention of the commissioner. In the past, well, who would you go to? You run to the minister, or you'll run to some other entity. But now you have somewhere you can go to lodge your complaint as to whether someone is duly registered or has the requisite work permit and all of the documentation in place to be working here on the island of Nevis. That is protection, Mr. President. It is protection, and it's also transparency at work. So, Mr. President, this ordinance, which I can go through page for page, and I don't think I have to, because I think the minister or the member who would have moved this particular ordinance will come back to wrap up and address some other issues. But one of the things that I like to see in this ordinance is on the section, I believe this is section, hold on a second, let's get it right. It's subsection 23, but I want to get the section right for the records. It is section, or part 1, subsection 23, sorry. Or part 2, my apologies, Mr. President. Part 2, subsection 23, I think it is. Let me pull it up. Bear with me, Mr. President. Let's get it right. Okay. Or part 2, subsection 19. My apologies. Let's get it right. Part 2, subsection 19. Where obviously, if you're not a registered contractor, you can still find work, you can still work, you can perform certain duties still, even if you're not a registered contractor. It says under this subsection, non-registered contractor under the ordinance, subject to the licenses on Business and Occupation Act, Cap 18.20. The provisions of this ordinance shall not prevent a person who is not a registered contractor from A, performing work as a contractor involved in minor alterations, not requiring submission to the Director of Physical Planning. So, Mr. President, if you want a window change tomorrow, someone can come and change it for you. That's the way I look at it. Simple task. Because that doesn't require you to submit an application to the Director of Physical Planning for approval. And B, providing services as a contractor where the building concern are no more than 500 square feet. So there are some conditions under which Alexis Jeffers, as a non-registered contractor, not registered with the commission, I can still perform some duties. And that gives everyone a chance. But the whole idea is to encourage our contractors, which there are a number of them on the island, and our subcontractors to get registered with the commission or the construction commissioner. And that, of course, is going to give them, I believe, a certificate number or registration number or some form of number that they can be identified with. You know, when they get registered, Mr. President, you know what they can do? On their job site, stick up there. It's in the registration. I didn't read the whole of it, but at least I'm thinking consistent with you and your team. You go down to your job and you stick up and you be big and bold about it. I am registered. I am duly registered. I have met the requisite or the qualifications that were required of me to be a registered contractor or subcontractor here in the island of Nevis. And that is a good thing, Mr. President. Anyone who is unfamiliar with you can always walk onto your job site and know they're walking onto the job site of someone who they can rely on. I want our contractors to take this one on board and understand that this is meant to help you along the way. As things continue to roll merrily along in the construction industry, we want them to also have the necessary training. We want them to improve their professionalism, and we want them to improve their delivery of service to our people. The same way lawyers are called to the bar and other professions have to meet certain standards and requirements, there's absolutely nothing wrong with our contractors who are performing an absolutely important job in this country. Or in, well, I can say country, St. Kitts Nevis, but we're speaking about Nevis now. It is absolutely important for them to continue to hone their skills, continue to professionalize themselves, and continue to make Nevis and Nevisians proud. And that is what we are attempting to do as a government. And that is why when you speak of Nevis, you can always speak glowingly about this island, because we are doing the right things. Even in a pandemic, we are trying to make life better for our people. Mr. President, with those few words, I want to wish this bill safe passage. It has my overwhelming support. And with those few words, Mr. President, may it please you.
Mr. President, I want to thank my colleague for his support. And I also want to thank the member opposite for her contribution and also for her support as well as to what we are seeking to do here, Mr. President. Mr. President, the member opposite raised a few matters that I feel under Section 8, Registration 4, suggesting to change 14 to 30. I believe that we see some value in that. Mr. President, the member opposite also spoke about the inclusion of the Director of Planning on the committee, the Complaints Committee. Now, we looked at that. We had a robust and lengthy discussion on that very issue. And it was generally felt that the Director of Planning is the individual or the entity that often gives approval for everything that is built on the island of Nevis. And the Director of Planning is the individual who also have direct interaction at times with contractors because of the nature of his job or her job. And we felt that it would not have been wise to have the Director of Planning on that committee. So we took that position. Like I said, we had much discussion about it, the legal folks, and we, even in the presence of the Director, he was, looking at all of that option. And we settled on the position that it might be prudent not to have him on that committee. The member also spoke about hardship on the general public. And I believe that I am a part of a caring, compassionate government.
Yes, I am.
And so we understand, Mr. President, that we are in a pandemic. We do understand that. And while we want to ensure that the regulation can come into fruition as quickly as possible, we recognize that it would be much wiser if the fees attached to the application and registration were deferred. And we considered late 2022 or early 2023, once we see that there is that greater buoyancy in the economy, then we can make that determination to have the fees implemented. Mr. President, it was also suggested about licensing division at planning, and we did not feel that that was, again, the role or the function of our planning department. We feel that the application would better serve through an independent entity that we are calling Construction Commissioner. Once all of the paperwork are in place, then the application would be approved and the necessary fees were paid at the Ministry of Finance, Inland Revenue, as the case may be. So we did not see the need for the licensing division at the planning department. That was a position that we took, and we also give some consideration to that. That was a suggestion that came to us as well, and we debated it, but we took the position that it would be much better not to have that provision placed at the planning department. Mr. President, I believe that we have had a robust discussion on this particular piece of legislation. I believe that as the member for Nevis number 4 would have indicated that this is by no way to deprive anyone of an opportunity, but to ensure that the industry that is making such a significant contribution to the development of Nevis, there must be some processes in place for persons to, as the member said, to highlight their registration and boast of their registration in this industry. Mr. President, with those brief comments, I want to wish this bill a safe passage to this Honorable House, and I would move, Mr. President, that there be a second reading of this bill. May it please.
The question is that this bill be now read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to provide for the establishment of a construction commissioner, the registration of building contractors, the regulation of building contractors, and for related incidental matters.
The bill has been read the second time. Housing Committee?
Schedules 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Question is that schedules 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Part 4.
The question is that part 4 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Part 3.
The question is that part 3 do form part of the bill. Those in favor? Aye. Those against?
Part 1.
3, 2.
Oh, sorry. Part 2.
The question is that part 2 do form part of the bill. Those in favor?
Section 8, Section 4, the recommendation from 14 days to 30 days, wish to change it to 14 to 30 days.
Which line? The third line? The third or the...
Second and third line. Second and third line.
If the Construction Commission has not received a change in request within 30 days from the date of request, the Commission shall ask for within 14 days. So that's confusing. 14 days after what? After the 30?
No, Mr. I don't know why the Commission shall after the expiration of the 30 days.
I think the 30 days above is reasonable.
30 days above?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm saying, how does it fit with the next line? If the Construction Commission has not received additional commission request on the subsection within 30 days from the date of request, the Construction Commission shall, after the expiration of 14 days.
No, after the expiration of the same 30 days. You're speaking to the 30 days above. Both of them have to be 30.
So 30 after the 30, the same 30. Yeah, that makes sense. So you're given 30 days. Is that what you wanted, member? Yes. So
Yes.
30 days for the information.
Yes.
And then 14 days thereafter, if you don't get the information.
But she said 30 days because we are in a pandemic and someone may have to get information from overseas.
Yeah.
But the question is whether 5 years from now we'll be in a pandemic or not. We are changing now for now, but I don't know what tomorrow is going to be like or next year. That is what the question, why change it?
Our 14 days is a short period.
Both of them have been 30 days.
People from overseas.
Second and third line has to be the same because it's a follow-up.
30 days ago.
The
So the
second
two
and
lines
third
have to be
line,
the same?
the two
They
have to
have
be
to
the
be
same. They have to be the same.
They have to be the same, 30
Because
and
it's the
30.
same thing. So if you change why it has to be the change in
Somebody
next.
is.
Because you have a provision for special contractors, those are people overseas. Because we don't know what information they will require.
But if they come
Both
here
of them have to be 30
they come here to work. Before they come, they're gathering information to find out what do I need when I come. That's how I see it. It's not just a drop on the island and just start it.
What's that?
Professional companies will get it done.
B?
The change.
Yeah. Yes, I have. We are open still for them.
So,
What are we changing? I don't.
so what's the change?
The 214 should be 30.
30.
We're changing the 14 to 30 in both places.
Question is that
You good?
I am good. What that is part
Section 8.
Two.
Of part 2.
part 2.8.
Yeah, number 4 under registration.
Yes.
Part 2, number 8 is
Subsection-
amended,
Yes.
Number 4,
where we have 14
change it to 30.
is now changed to 30.
That's correct. At both places, we receive 14. There is also another amendment to subsection 5B. After the word "and," we are inserting "giving." Right? Oh, before the word "and," giving reasons for refusal. After the word refusal, we have a comma, and we're inserting the words giving reasons for refusal.
That is which number? 5?
5B.
5B, yes.
5B. No. 5B I have on the section functions of the Construction Commissioner.
8.5b.
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 Yes.
8.5B. Thank you. Yes, notify the application in writing within receipt of the 30 days in receipt of the application, and you are changing to
Yes. After the word refusal, we have a comma, and then we are inserting the word given reasons for refusal. Semicolon. Given reasons for the refusal.
Question is that part 2, subsection 8,
5B.
where we have section 4, where we have 14 days, that is now changed to 30 days,
That's correct.
and section 5, notify B should now read, notify the applicant in writing within 30 days of receipt of the application of the refusal and giving reasons for the refusal.
No, not the and does not between. The and
No.
remains. The and remains where it is.
Yes.
And after refusal, there's a comma and it says, given reasons for the refusal.
Yeah.
So the and remains is where it is.
Good. Yeah. I have it. Subsection 5 is amended. Notify the application in writing within 30 days of receipt of the application of the refusal, giving reasons for the refusal. Going on to section C and C.
Yes.
Yeah. So the change would be number 8, subsection 4, and subsection 5B.
That's correct.
Do form part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Part 1,
Question is that part 1 do form part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
enacting clause,
Question is that the enacting clause do form part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
title,
Question is that the title do form part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
resume.
House resumes the sitting.
Mr. President, I rise to report that to this Honorable House that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Contractors Registration and Regulation Bill 2021 has passed through committee stage with a few amendments. Mr. President, I wish also to advise that we have received the fiat from the Deputy Governor General since this is a money bill. The fiat, Mr. President, is available to this Honorable House, which gives us the permission to deal with this money bill. Also, Mr. President, pursuant to Section 54 of the rules of this Honorable House, I move that this bill be read a third time and pass.
57, not 54.
Subsection 57, Mr. President. Probably think my glasses need changing.
Mr. President, I rise to second the motion.
The question is that this question is that the question is that the bill shortly entitled the Nevis Contractors Registration and Regulation Bill 2021 be read a third time and pass.
Those in favor?
Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to provide for the establishment of a construction commissioner, the registration of building contractors, the regulation of building contractors, and for related or incidental matters.
The bill has been read a third time and passed.
Regulations.
Mr. President, I rise once again to lay in this Honorable House the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Regulations 2021. Mr. President, the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance of 2005 is the current instrument that has been used to promote orderly and prudent physical planning and development on Nevis. However, during its implementation, it was realized that the ordinance lends itself to some gaps, thus making it very difficult to arrive at the determined decision in certain cases. The Department of Physical Planning and Environment of the Ministry of Physical Planning is in the process of reviewing and implementing the Nevis Physical Development Plan for some time. And it is important, Mr. President, that the ministry is in a position to execute the plan in keeping with the supporting policies, guidelines, and regulations to the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance. In light of this, it was accepted that a review of the update of the ordinance was critical to ensure proper control of developments. Of similar concern was the lack of supporting policies and regulations to the ordinance, which added to the difficulty in determining application and made the process inefficient and uncertain at times. Currently, the Department of Physical Planning and Environment is issuing various material consideration for determining application, which have different guidelines on components such as setbacks, building heights, fencing, to name a few. These different guidelines put the Department of Physical Planning in a position where it may prove to be difficult to justify certain decisions made. The Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance represents one of the principal instruments referred for the establishment of the overall planning process, especially as it relates to the development control and land use planning. Currently, the department operates without the necessary supporting regulations such as environmental impact assessment regulations and other guidelines, which makes it very difficult to efficiently regulate development activities and manage land use. A complete legislative framework will therefore provide an opportunity for good governance, where both public and private interests in land are adequately guided. Mr. President, in 2015, with funding from the German government, the department contracted a consultant, Ms. Tara Green, through a rigorous tendering process to review the planning ordinance and draft some regulations to the ordinance. One of the major achievements of the project was the contribution to enhance stakeholders' awareness on critical issues relating to physical planning, and the need to ensure that adequate standards, practices, and procedures are infused in the physical planning legal and regulatory framework. This was achieved through the engagement of various stakeholders through consultations and meetings. These stakeholders, Mr. President, were undertaken with government officials and technical experts, among other individuals, who informed the drafting of the revised ordinance and the accompanying regulations. Engagement of the above referred stakeholders took various forms throughout the project, noticeably. Discussion of the first draft of the regulations were undertaken at the inception meeting of the Ministry of Physical Planning way back in 2016. The submission of written comments on the draft amendments to the ordinance and draft regulations. Mr. President, a meeting of government official and private sector participants in November of 2016, at which the second draft were reviewed. Participants and invitees were drawn from ministries and departments responsible for fisheries, agriculture, tourism, environmental health, disaster management, legal department, public works, water department, the Nevis Historical and Conservation Society, the Nevis Housing and Land Development Corporation, and the Nevis Electricity Company Limited, as well as private sector architects. In addition to these stakeholders, consultations and discussions with key personnel of the contracting authority, the consultant also undertook the requisite desk research and secondary research to complement the findings and information received from the stakeholders. Mr. President, since that exercise, there have been several amendments to the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance under my watch, with significant inputs from our legal department, the Ministry of Physical Planning and Environment, and the Department of Physical Planning and Environment. I am happy to report, Mr. President, that we have made a giant step ahead in ensuring that the ordinance is improved and that it has the requisite guidelines and regulations necessary to make the process better for users and stakeholders in the planning sector and processes. Today, Mr. President, I am sharing with this Nevis Island Assembly that as the Minister with responsibility for planning and environment, and in accordance with the provisions of the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance, we have developed and finalized regulations to the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Ordinance as amended, thus entitled the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Regulations 2021. Mr. President, once these regulations are gazetted, they will become law of the land. And the necessary supporting documents will give better operational procedures at our planning department. Mr. President, these regulations consist of 7 parts, along with several schedules. The parts of the regulation cover sections such as preliminaries, type of development, permission, general requirements, applications for detailed development, permission for land, applications for detailed development, permission for subdivision, assessment report, EIA, heritage assessment, traffic analysis, etc., and other requirements. Mr. President, we do hope that these regulations would bring some greater order to the operation of our physical planning department, where all stakeholders would now recognize the specific requirements of our planning department. Additionally, Mr. President, we have also developed a road naming policy, which would become part of our guidelines, administered by the Department of Physical Planning. Quoting from the policy document, Mr. President, the NIA is responsible for the naming of roads and numbering of land and buildings under Section 9 St. Kitts and Nevis Local Government Act of 1986. Road names and property numbers are used by a wide array of users for the accurate and quick identification of properties, including our emergency services, our postal and delivery services, visitors, service deliveries such as power and telephone and water, our hardware suppliers, Hosfords and TDC, all use the naming and numbering of our roads, Mr. President. It is essential to strike a balance between infrastructure development and community needs, thus formalizing the ad hoc procedure that has been followed in previous years for road naming. In adopting this policy, the Nevis Island Administration seeks to establish a modern street naming addressing system for the island. It will be the responsibility, Mr. President, of the Department of Physical Planning to implement, administer, and enforce this policy by making appropriate recommendations to the Development Advisory Committee. Mr. President, this policy document covers areas such as legislation and authority for naming roads, principles, application of the policy, naming of new road or private way, renaming of an existing road or private way, name sources, sign erection, communication, spelling, form, public notice of name assignment or change, and advise to relevant parties of the new name and name change. Mr. President, we do hope that we will get the full cooperation of the general public and all stakeholders for the important policy document. And I want to say here and now, Mr. President, to our various community organizations, they now have the necessary piece of policy document to have the various names in their various communities' name, Mr. President. So they can now ensure that they can apply to the Department of Physical Planning to have the various streets in their community named or renamed as they see fit, Mr. President. Mr. President, with those brief comments on the Nevis Physical Planning and Development Control Regulations 2021 and our road naming policy, I hope that these two pieces of document would go down towards the greater development of our beautiful island of Nevis. May it please the Mr. President.
No, you just... The regulation has been laid on the table. I would now ask the question. The approval. Don't worry. Okay, fine. Clerk, go ahead.
Adjournment.
Mr. President, I rise and seek your leave for the adjournment of this Honorable House, sign and I. But before we get a mover, a seconder, sorry, let me just say a few words on the adjournment. Mr. President, October 10th, that is Sunday, will mark 10 years since I've been elected to this Honorable House. But not 10 years in government, though. Just 8 years. As you may recall, yes, you have to come through here to get to there. But as you may recall, Mr. President, in July of 2011, we had a Nevis Island Assembly election. And if the Nevisian public may recall, it was an election that was contested in court and was eventually overturned, and Nevis 2 was deemed to be, the election in Nevis 2 was deemed to be null and void. First time in the history of this island. It's the first time in the history of this island that any election was overturned and the seat was declared null and void. Mr. President, you may recall that hundreds of persons' names were removed from the voters list. Then, persons who were walking the streets of Charlestown saying good morning, good afternoon, or good night to the persons who did such act went to the registration office or the electoral office and had their names removed and said they were dead. But they were passing them on the street. This is a fact, Mr. President, so I see you look up because I'm just talking what has been documented.
But if you're
not by
talking,
me.
but if you're talking, I have to look at you talking.
Oh, seemed like you were frightened by the sound of dead. But they were pronounced dead, even though they were walking the streets of Charlestown and saying good morning to the former leader, good morning to the same former minister who may have suggested otherwise. So I was not able to get into government then to start the work that I was elected to do, because remember back then I rolled up my sleeve and said I was ready to work. Anyway, I came into Parliament on the 10th of October 2011, on the second sitting of Parliament in that term, and marked my name and left. That was the protest that we would have exhibited then to what, or the atrocity that would have taken place during that election. However, in January of 2013, we had fresh elections, and voila, the people of Nevis spoke in resounding fashion. And they have spoken then, they spoke thereafter in 2017, and they'll continue speaking in resounding fashion to say, well, Alexis Jeffers, as a representative of St. James, Nevis 4, is the representative that they have embraced because they trust him. They have embraced me because they have the confidence in me. And they have embraced me because, of course, I have continued to work on their behalf. And I am going to continue to do so. And I want to thank the people of St. James for the confidence that they've placed in me. And I say that confidently, Mr. President, because I know for a fact that they're pleased with their representation and their representative to start with, and the representation that I've provided to them over the last 10 years, and even before, because I can speak of my exploit in the constituency or parish of St. James ever since I was a little boy, playing cricket, captain in the Highlights International cricket team, being the president as well. Oh, boy, deeper than a coconut tree. This is a 100-year-old tree you're talking about. Anyway, I have been there, Mr. President, and continue to be there. And you see me standing, standing up, attention, ready. So I want to thank them. And here's how I'll show my, I just want to demonstrate my appreciation to the people of St. James. So I have a few things planned for the next couple of weeks. On the 12th of October, I have a community day where I'll be handing out some care packages in St. James. But I'll do so in St. Thomas's as well. The reason being, these are difficult times. And at the federal level, I'm also the representative of St. Thomas's. So I cannot do such thing in St. James without showing my appreciation as well to the people of St. Thomas's. On the 13th, Wednesday the 13th, I'll do so in St. Thomas's. On the 16th, that is Saturday the 16th of October, I'll have a massive cleanup campaign in St. James. And when I say massive, we are moving white goods, green goods, whatever there is to move. We'll have a dumpster in Newcastle, one in Fountain, one in Camps, one in Brick Lane, and one in Butlers. What I've been told by the solid waste is that once they get filled up, they're going to come, move it, and bring it back. So you're not going to fill it up once, and that's it. So we're giving persons in St. James on the 16th a chance to remove some of the items in their backyard that they want to dispose of so we can get them to the landfill. On the 23rd, we are going to reciprocate that, or duplicate that, sorry, in St. Thomas's. Like I said, can't leave them out because they have been good to us and good to me. So we are doing that on the 23rd. Same thing. We are having a dumpster in Jessops, one in Bansgut, one in Cotton Round, one in Westbury, and also one in Craddock Road. 5 of them. Yeah? And we'll do the same thing. As they get filled, we're taking them to the dump and bring that, that bin back. On the 30th, Mr. President, we are promoting healthy lifestyle and well-being with a walk, starting from what we call 5 ton there in the Cotton, and we're going to walk to Herbert Beach. That's a good long walk. It's a good long walk. Listen, it may seem long, but we'll probably get it done in an hour. You never know. Start at 6 o'clock in the morning and we'll be done probably by 7:30. The good thing is that we'll have, here we're promoting healthy lifestyles. We're going to have a healthy breakfast there as well too, on the 30th. And then we'll cap it off on the 31st with a church service at my church, my good old Anglican. I ain't moving for nothing good, so that's where we'll celebrate together. It's a church service on the 31st of October. St. James Anglican, I did say that, yeah. And I'm hoping for the walk as well. All of you would come. The entire CCM party that has been good to me, embraced me back in 2006, and have been my family since then. I want the entire CCM party to come out and we walk all the way up to St. James there through the Herbert Beach. When you finish with the walk, you can take a swim, Brantley. You can swim? Huh? No, Cleon here, so you come. Automatic. Cleon want to be with winners, you know. Tell her come over long time. Anyway, Mr. President, so those are the activities, and I'll speak more about them as time approaches. At this point as well, Mr. President, I also want to express my sympathies to all of the families over in the St. James area that are bereaved at this time. One in particular, there is a funeral on Saturday afternoon at the Combomay Methodist Church at 2 o'clock. That's for the final, the funeral service, of Miss Sylvia Warner Nisbet. She'll be buried on Saturday afternoon, so I'm hoping to go and pay my final respects. And anyone else who is bereaved at this time, I want to express my profound sympathies at this time as well. So, Mr. President, I think this month is going to be a busy month, October. Many things are happening, and we want to be out in the community and show our love and appreciation to the people. So we'll do that throughout the month of October and beyond, as I've always done. Mr. President, those are my few words on the adjournment. May I please you?
Mr. President, I rise on the adjournment to offer some words of congratulations in the first instance and also words of condolences. Mr. President, over the last few months, we have had a number of individuals retiring from the Nevis Water Department, in the persons of Mr. James Keynes Tintin, who retired on the 19th of May 2021. We also had Mr. Conrad Huggins, better known to us as Monks, who retired on the 8th of September 2021, and Mr. Carlton Williams, better known to us as Cherry, who retired on the 30th of September 2021. Mr. President, when I did the calculation of the years of service for these gentlemen, it computed to 116 years. Let me say it again, 116 years of combined total service to the people of Nevis. Mr. Jim Keynes for 44 years, Mr. Conrad Huggins for 40 years, and Mr. Carlton Williams for 32 years. Mr. President, the ministry had a brief ceremony last Thursday evening for these gentlemen. And I said to them that they came to work at the water department in a time when I was still a little boy. where I had to make sure that the drum was filled before I went to school. And they have left the water department, Mr. President, ensuring that every single parish, every single village, every single household on the island of Nevis have access to potable water. And I said to them then, Mr. President, that they have been transformative on the island of Nevis, because there, many years of hard work, we have seen the transformation on the island of Nevis. And I want to use this platform and this rostrum to say to them that the people of Nevis owe them a debt of gratitude. We gave them a bouquet of flowers and a plaque, and it's all nice. But I am saying, Mr. President, that these three gentlemen, that the people of Nevis is indebted to them for their many years of dedicated service. And I wanted to use this opportunity to say to them how thankful we are for their years of service and commitment to the people of Nevis. And I want to wish them happy retirement, Mr. President. Mr. President, we also saw the retirement of a different kind of Mr. Gary Liebert from his post as Chief Labor Officer on the island of Nevis, who worked in the civil service for some 29 years. And while we at the ministry are sad to see him go, Mr. President, because all of us would know that Gary is a household name on the island of Nevis. And he has been one of the brave individuals that continue to serve successive governments when it comes to our labor issues and labor relation matters on the island of Nevis. I want to say to Gary how thankful we are for his many years of dedicated service to the Labor Department and to the people of the island of Nevis. He has been appointed to the St. Christopher Nevis Social Security Board as a senior manager effective the 1st of October. And I want to wish Mr. Liebert well. I know at this time he is grieving because of the loss of his brother. But I want to say to Gary that the people of Nevis are better off because of his years of service. And he can take the same fortitude in his new position to ensure that the people of Nevis will continue to be better off with him at the Social Security on the island of Nevis. Mr. President, I also want to use this opportunity to offer words of condolences. And since we've been here last, Mr. President, we have lost a number of persons from my constituency. We have lost Miss Pandora Covalli, Mr. President, Covalli, in early September. And she was my neighbor for quite some years on Government Road, Mr. President. But this was a lady who, in my mind, was an extremely talented individual. Quiet, unassuming, a masterful pianist, and an even more masterful vocalist, Mr. President. Sometimes we look at these individuals and they are taken from us, and we dare not question the master works, but I believe that she has been called to a greater calling, Mr. President, in heaven. And I want to say to the family that her service here on the island of Nevis I know she has worked long and hard in the fields of education, and I believe that many individuals are better off because of her service in education and in music. And I hope and I pray that her family would find some level of comfort in this difficult time. Mr. President, Janice Speechless Nisbet. She worked at the ministry at Public Works for many years. And we were all saddened to learn of the loss of Janice. She is one of my church members at the St. Paul's Anglican Church. And I know, Mr. President, that she would be deeply missed at the St. Paul's Anglican Church because she is an extraordinary steel pan player. I know her family would miss her, Dolvin and her son, Creston, and her brother, Loston. Mr. President, I hope that the family would remember her in the fond way because of the kind of person she was. Jovial, always filled with music and always have a music spirit about her. And also, Mr. President, Miss Alvis Dyer, another member from my constituency. And when we think about Miss Dyer, Mr. President, we think of a strong, forthright, and a fearless woman here on the island of Nevis. Mrs. Dyer would have been one of the founding pillars of this great Concerned Citizens Movement Party. And she would have actually participated in local elections. She was not successful, Mr. President, but I believe that the inspiration that she would have given to many ladies at that time, we are now seeing the fruits of that pathway that she would have blazed back then. She was a teacher of impeccable standard. And many of the young men and women who she would have interacted with as a teacher are now making significant contributions, Mr. President, to the island of Nevis, to the Federation, and I would even dare say to humanity. I want to say to her husband and to her children how saddened we are of their loss. And we know that, I think it was just in July or August, Minister Evelyn and I celebrated with her on her birthday. And while we recognize that she was getting a bit slow, we did not expect this to come at this time. I want to say to her family that she have left a legacy that they all can be proud of. And I believe that the island of Nevis and the people of Nevis are much better off because of the contribution of Ms. Dyer, of Ms. Cavalli, and also Janice Nisbet. Mr. President, with those words, I pray that God would continue to have favor on them and that they would rest in peace.
Mr. President, I rise very briefly on the adjournment to add my own quota of condolences to those who have passed, the families of those who have passed, and the friends of those who have passed to the great beyond. I think that my colleague, the member for number 1, has named quite a few of the stalwarts that we have lost. And I would wish to join my own voice with his in extending condolences to their families. Today is, however, the International Day for Teachers, and you would have heard
initially our Minister with responsibility for education pay tribute to our teachers, as I believe most of us have done. I reflect, Mr. President, that one of those who would have impacted my own life so tremendously has also passed on. And that was Joycelyn Liebert of Gingerland, whom I first encountered as a young boy from Handlers Road, teaching at the Chapel School, if I recall, and later the Gingerland Primary School. I believe it is fitting that as we celebrate teachers locally, regionally, and internationally, and as we pay tribute to those who have contributed so much, that I should also remember Mrs. Liebert and the tremendous contribution she would have made to the life and times of so many, and the contribution she made to me and my own personal development. I believe it is true that teachers really shape our future, and teachers help to bring our dreams to life. And they help us imagine a world far beyond our existing circumstances. And I would want to go on record, Mr. President, to thank all of our teachers for their continued service, especially in this very difficult time now, when they're forced sometimes to teach virtually, and other times to teach in person, in classrooms, and are constantly exposed to the difficulties, of course, of COVID-19 and this pandemic. So I join my colleagues, I join all of Nevis in expressing our heartfelt gratitude to our teachers and to wish them a wonderful day today. Let me end, Mr. President, by expressing my warm congratulations to my colleague, the member from Nevis 3. 4. Forgive me. From Nevis 4. Who, Mr. President, has really traveled a remarkable path to be here for a decade. And I have been with him over the course of this journey, and I believe that it is always a remarkable thing, Mr. President, when young people, because I think we were young then, he will say he's still young. I don't lay claim to youth anymore. But, Mr. President, when young people get involved in the political process, and even more so when they get involved in opposition. You see, when you're in government, people are attracted. It's much easier. But when you're in opposition, as I recall sitting over there once and hearing somebody who used to sit over here point over there and said, those cold, hard benches. It used to be cold and hard over there for sure. We have improved the aesthetics considerably. But, Mr. President, I believe that it has been a remarkable journey. And I reflect from whence the honorable member for number 4 would have come, his own life's journey, saying as he did, that from a boy he has engaged with his community. His roots are deeply embedded in his community. And for his community to now entrust it confidence in him, time and time again. Because while he would have mentioned 2011, and we had the ruckus in 2011, I won't get into that. That is a matter now for the law students. But in 2013, and again in 2015, and again in 2017, and again in 2020, he has been there. And I am prayerful that God will bless him with good health, because I believe that if he has good health, he will continue to deliver for the people of number 4 and for the people of Nevis. Because sometimes we get a little caught up with the constituency politics, but we must remember that the DNA of the member for number 4 is all over the island of Nevis. And he has contributed tremendously to the life and times of our beautiful island. I believe that our young people should look on and take pattern and be inspired, because he was not born with a golden spoon. He was not born into a family with money and opportunity. He pulled himself up by the proverbial bootstraps And a decade later, he's here standing as the proud representative of the people of St. James. And I believe any youngster from Goat Hole, any youngster from Whitehall, any youngster from Brownhill, Henley Park, any youngster from Zion, any youngster from Rollins Mountain, any youngster from Ramsbury should look and see what others have done and say that, as I always say, they're limited only by their ambition and their capacity for hard work. None of us, Mr. President, is ever limited by the circumstances of our birth. If we were, I certainly would not be here. And I don't believe that many who are in here today would be here. And so let us lead our lives in such a way that we can inspire the young man, the young boy, the young girl out there, that they can be anything that they want to be if they're willing to work hard, if they're willing to do what is necessary, if they're willing to serve others. And so I could not let the opportunity pass and not commend my colleague and friend. I'm going to name him the Honorable Alexis Jeffers for his tremendous contribution thus far, not only to the people of his constituency, but to the wider Nevisian community, and even now, to the wider country of St. Kitts and Nevis, where he's now serving in a federal capacity. And so, Mr. President, with those few words, I would want to wish his, what sounds like a month of activities, all the very best. I shall certainly commit to participate, Honorable Minister, in as many of those activities as I can. And I wish you continued success, because ultimately, people support others whom they know have the capacity to deliver and whom they know have a track record of service to the community. That's what it comes down to. I hear a lot of noise and fury about politics and who want to get in and who's in and all of this drama. Election after election, I hear people postulate about why people vote. The answer is simple. People vote for people that they have confidence in.
Amen.
People vote for people that they know, that they have seen. And when you have lived a life embedded in the community, as the member for number 4 has, it is a very easy answer when the time comes for people to say, send me the young man because I know him, I have seen him at work, and I know what he can do to deliver. And that is why I live, and I invite all of us to live, by the simple mantra that we ignore the noise. Because sometimes you get distracted by noise and focus instead on why we are here, which is to serve the people of Nevis. So with those words, Mr. President, I would want to thank all who would have been here today and contributed, and I would want to support the motion for the adjournment. Sign it at this time.
The question is that this House adjourn, sign and aye. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. House adjourned.